What's up, Bulls fans, and welcome to a special YouTube edition of the CHGO Bulls podcast here. It's Mark Karanzoulis down from Australia calling in at MK Hoops on Twitter. I'm Will Gottlieb. You can follow me at Won't Gottlieb. And we are brought to you by PointsBet. Use promo code CHGO and you get a bunch of free bets. You can get a membership to our site, allchgo.com, and a bunch of other goodies. So, Mark, very glad to have you here. We're trying something new out. Bulls are obviously playing the Bucks in the first round of the playoffs. You can be excited about it. You can be dreading it. Whatever you're doing, it's happening. And the Bulls have to put together a playoff rotation, a substitution pattern. And so we thought we would do just that.
Yeah, exactly. We think we're smart enough to be coaches or assistant coaches from our vantage point. So
Speak for
why the
yourself.
hell not put it to the tens? Wow. Well, look, I like to think I'm the head coach on this call anyway, but you can be my assistant or assistant to the head coach, however we want to frame it.
Coach,
But yeah,
let's
let's get into this. I want to build out some lineups as to how we think how Billy Donovan and how his staff may handle the rotation against the Bucks. It's going to be interesting to see how we map it out versus what maybe Billy does. I think that'll be a fun exercise to track over time. But nonetheless, maybe we can get into how we would build out the rotation.
Yeah, and I think the idea here is, and we've talked a little bit about this so far, but the idea is to try to keep this realistic. So one of the major factors here is looking into sort of the rotations that Billy already uses and building on those. So what that means is essentially we want to have DeMar DeRozan play 3 stints per half. So he's going to come out a little bit earlier in the first quarter, come back in late in the first quarter, play a little bit into the second quarter, come back out, and then come back in to finish out the third quarter. While Zach and Vooch typically do 2 stints per half, so they'll play a little bit deeper into the first quarter, have a rest, and then come back in with about 10-ish minutes to go in the second quarter to close out. Other key things here are, this is the playoffs. The rotation is going to be a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter. Guys are going to play more minutes. And there are going to be some big questions about how we handle, especially, I would say, the starting point guard and power forward position. So as we look at this here, we've got our 3 key starters locked in: LaVine, DeMar, Vooch. Mark, we've talked about this, but tell the people who we're going to be starting at point guard and power forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's still up for debate, I suppose, and we'll see what Billy does. But we've ultimately decided that we're running with Alex Caruso at point guard, and at power forward, we will be going with Patrick Williams, who has earned his way into the starting unit for full time now. Like, we've only seen Pat get that starting nod because of injuries over the last few games, and resting players. But we're going to assume that after his 35-point outing the other night against the Timberwolves, that he's earned himself that power forward position. So let's assume Caruso and Patrick Williams are starting at point guard and power forward.
And I think the question with this was there's a choice of starting two of the following 3, right? It's Caruso, Patrick, and Io. You can go small with Caruso and Io out there together. You could go Io and Patrick. And the reason why we wanted to go with Patrick and Caruso here, which I think is actually kind of controversial. Io's been starting and obviously playing great. Caruso's got the back injury. The reason being, we wanted to combine size and experience, not go super small against a really long Bucks team. And I think having too many young guys with no playoff experience on the court at any given time is probably not the move. So we've got our starting 5 here locked in. How should we get into minutes and positions?
Well, look, as we sort of noted, we've got to keep LaVine and Vooch together. So that's one thing. And we've got to keep Caruso and DeRozan together. So they're the factors that we need to consider. So as you sort of started to map out there, I think Caruso playing the first 5.5 to 6 minutes makes sense. We have to realize that this dude currently is carrying a back injury. So maybe we don't want him to be playing huge stints and to get him a bit of a break whenever we can. So 6 minutes feels kind of right for Caruso. So that makes sense. And knowing that we want to pair him with DeRozan, then we need DeRozan in that first quarter for at least the first 6 minutes, if not more. So maybe we can map that out too, that, DeMar is going to go up to, let's just call it 7 minutes, the first 7 minutes, something like that.
This is exactly down to the second. So bear with me as I try to plug these in correctly. But yeah, you said it. I think DeRozan's going to have a little bit of a shorter stint than both Levine and Vucevic. So we're going to have Levine in here until DeRozan comes out at 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have Vucevic play until I think 10
Let's
minutes is
call it
what we
9. I think we
9
had it at
minutes.
9. Yeah.
Oh, you want to know something? I have to make these quarters 12 minutes long, and that's going to start over this whole thing. So that's no fun, but I'll do it quickly as you continue talking for me.
Yeah, so we've got Vooch, we've got Levine playing the majority of the first quarter. That's essentially what we're rolling with. So effectively what will happen is once DeMar checks out of that first unit, Levine will then act as the primary guy, basically. So we're ensuring that one of Levine and DeRozan is on the court at all times. And we assume that's going to be the case regardless, because Billy's going to be leaning on these two guys beyond, their standard 35, 36 minutes that they play per game. We're expecting that to be at minimum 38 minutes per game. So them crossing over, ensuring that one of them is on the court the whole time is going to be a lot easier in the postseason than maybe the regular season itself. But in this instance, we want to maintain that methodology. So when DeMar comes off the court, he is staying. Essentially Zach is staying on the court.
So that means we want to move Zach to the 3. So he'll come in and play, that longer stretch that we talked about, up to 10 minutes in the first quarter. And let's go ahead and then bring in Coby White off the bench to fill in as the shooting guard off the bench.
The 2 guy. Put him in there, and then this is when I as well can check in for Caruso. We can put that into.
And are we comfortable having those 2 close out the where is Io?
I think we may need to add him if we haven't already.
Gotta add him here. Are we comfortable with them closing out the quarter?
Yeah, look, I think there's no way of getting around the fact that the Bulls at one point during this rotation will have a situation where they've got 2 young guys on the floor at one time. We wanted to avoid the situation where all 3 of Io and Coby and Pat are on the court at the same time, because that's probably not ideal in a playoff setting. But against second units, maybe you can get away with both Io and Coby sort of finishing out quarters or whatever it may be, or starting quarters. So there's no way around it. This is part of the rotation. If the rotation sort of cut to 8 or 9 guys and 3 of those guys you're leaning on is Pat, Coby, and Io, obviously there's going to be some crossover at some point. So let's just try to minimize that as much as we can. So to that point, let's maybe boost Patrick Williams' minutes up to, let's just call it 9 minutes. Let's match his and Vooch's minutes as much as we can.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense too, right? I mean, you're talking about a team with Giannis and with Brook Lopez. They're going to be playing heavy minutes at the 4-5. You need your bigger guys up there. I think at this point, yes, Patrick is young, but he's also the most qualified to defend at that 4 position in terms of size. Obviously he's got some work to do to be an elite defender that I think we all hope he can be, but just physically and tools wise, I think he needs to be out there big minutes despite the inexperience. So let's close out the quarter with Coby here at the 2. I'm not going to worry about making these exact because it's too finicky.
So this is where it gets interesting. This is where we thought we'd bring back DeMar in, because you mentioned from the top, we'd have DeMar playing 3 stints. So he's obviously played his first in the first quarter. Zach sort of takes over that primary role towards the back half of that first quarter, but then obviously we need to get Zach a break. So maybe this is when DeMar can come in and sort of finish off that first quarter and lead into or blend that into that second quarter for his.
Yeah, and I think that works too, because now you have DeMar in with shooters, with a good balance of offense, defense here. And I think the big question is what you do at the backup 4-5, where there's not a lot of depth here. We do want to keep this realistic. We're not going to go Derrick Jones at the 5 for 40 minutes a night, as I think all the people know we want to. But I think Tristan has been the guy since he got here. He's going to be the backup center, like it or not. And so we'll slot him in for 3 minutes here at the end of the first. And then this was another interesting spot where, having the idea of tethering DeMar and Caruso's minutes together and making sure you have experience and versatility in terms of shooting and defense. There's an argument to be made for Derrick Jones. There's an argument to be made for Javonte, but our thought was to bring Caruso back in and sort of match those minutes with DeMar's.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if Billy Donovan's current rotation or the trend of his rotation is anything to go by, it feels like Javonte is that ninth dude, the utility player who he can put in at any point, plug and play. If you need an injection of energy, then that's your guy. But in terms of thinking about the playoff rotation and it maybe being limited in the playoffs, I think we're probably going to see more Caruso. We may not even see Javonte, but we'll touch on that in a second as we get into the second unit here. But as
So
you
we're
sort
going
of
to
noted,
start
Will,
again. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead, Mark.
So no, into that second unit there, like as we sort of said, that stint there, we want DeMar to continue that going into that second quarter, so it makes sense to keep him on. You just added Tristan Thompson. Obviously, that makes sense. He's going to be that backup center, even though I would like it to be Derrick Jones Jr., but it's not going to be the case. So this is effectively the start of the second unit. Oh, sorry, the start of the second quarter as to who's on the floor. And I think thus far it makes sense. And continuing what we said before, Will, keeping Caruso and DeMar together, I think at this point, given Ayo's experience, it probably makes more sense to keep Caruso back into the start of the second quarter and him running the point at this point.
Yeah. And so then you look at the sort of balance of this lineup. You've got, the Caruso DeMar pairing, which we like. You've got shooting out there in the form of Coby White. And again, the power forward backup question. And I think this is going to be sort of the most flexible throughout the playoffs. But I think this is where you go to Javonte, give him some minutes, give him a little spark off the bench, and see if you can't get something going in transition, get some steals. And Javonte's played really well. I think he deserves to be in the rotation at some point. But as we said, these lineups do get smaller, they do get shorter, and there is less room for error. So he's going to have sort of short leash here until, let's call it 5 minutes, and then we'll bring Patrick back in to close out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's clear that, at least I'm assuming it's clear that Patrick Williams is the preferred option at power forward at this point. It feels like he's won the job. So the way we're setting this up makes complete sense. Obviously, Tristan Thompson, backup center, he's going to play some minutes in the second quarter, but from thereafter, we expect Vooch to check back in. And when we know, as what we said before, we want to keep Vooch and LaVine paired to get together as much as possible. When Vooch comes back in that second quarter, we want to start thinking about LaVine coming back in at the same time as well. So to that point, we've got Vooch back on the floor. Let's throw LaVine back on too.
Yeah, and we're going to mirror DeMar and LaVine at the small forward in that in the first quarter. So we'll put him in for, let's call it 2 minutes here. Is that what we said? Yeah, 2 minutes. And then we'll shift him back to the shooting guard spot when DeMar comes back in to close out. And, starting lineup is great, but ideally you're closing with your strongest unit. And I think we're also in this case starting with our strongest unit. So it's safe to say that we will close with the same starters that we have.
Yeah, 100%. So we get DeMar that couple minutes break to get him, jacked and juiced for that final portion of that second quarter there. So he'll come back in and to close things, and obviously Zach will move back over to the 2-guard position once DeMar sort of checks back in midway through that second quarter. So once that happens, obviously the flow-on effect is Coby White comes off the floor, Zach takes his minutes at 2-guard. We mentioned that we want to sort of paired Caruso and DeRozan as much as possible. So what we, I guess, have to do here now, Will, is sort of just sort out that point guard position, and maybe we can get Ayo in for a couple of minutes in the midway part of the second quarter there. He can sort of spell Caruso for a little bit, and then Caruso can come back in with maybe, the final 5 or so minutes to go in that second quarter to close the half with our starters that we initially put into the game. That kind of makes sense and feels like the best allocation of minutes. Like you're using your younger guys, but at the same time, you're relying on your more experienced dudes, the guys that you want to end the game with. Obviously, that's how we're going to close the first half with as well.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any real discussion here about what the Bulls' best lineup is going to look like. You want Caruso out there. You've obviously got your big 3 in LaVine, DeMar, and Vooch, and then Patrick Williams is kind of that guy who really is the X factor here. I think it's kind of a cliche buzzword, but he's going to have to play super well, and this is his opportunity to do it. But again, Derrick Jones will be ready to go. Javonte Green will be ready to go. Tristan Thompson and Vooch could play together at the 4-5. So he's going to have to play well. He's not just granted these minutes, but I think for our purposes right now, we're going to slot him in for heavy minutes, 16 in the first half.
Yeah, and look, in the interest of time, maybe we won't go over the second half, but essentially what we want to do in the second half is make it exactly the same as the first half. The lone change I think that we would have is maybe Javonte doesn't play in the second half, and we lean on Caruso, we lean on Patrick Williams, we lean on a couple other guys more heavily, because this is the postseason ultimately. Like, this is when you're going to lean on your main guys more, like whereby DeMar and Zach were playing, 36, 37 minutes a game previously. We expect that to be ramped up to 40 odd plus. Like, we'll pack them in maybe to 38 minutes to start, but I think based on how things are going to go, ultimately this will be an 8 to 9 man rotation at most. But I wouldn't be surprised if Billy even has games where he has a 7-man rotation. So if that's the case, Caruso, DeRozan, Levine, Vooch, these sorts of guys are going to be playing more minutes, which means you're going to see less of Javonte and, maybe even Io and Coby. Like, there's going to be situations whereby maybe we're slotting them in to play 15 to 20 minutes a game, but maybe Io only gets like 10 minutes in one of these games, depending on how things are going and how, Donovan is adjusting his lineup and those sorts of things. So in a lot of ways, the rotation in the second half will mirror what we have in the first, but with small subtle adjustments, and Billy's obviously free to toggle that within the game as to how he sees fit.
Yeah, another adjustment I'm going to make here is giving Vooch an extra minute here in the fourth quarter. Again, I think in these closer games, ideally you're going to want your best players out there as much as possible. I think 38-ish minutes for our top 3 guys here. I think that makes sense. Again, as you said, it would not surprise me if they're getting into the low to mid 40s. So these are going to ramp up. I think for game 1, we want to try to reserve the Alex Carusos of the world who are dealing with back injuries, the Zach LaVines who have the knee. DeMar and Vooch have been Iron Men. Patrick Williams played 40 odd minutes last night against Minnesota. So these guys can get up there in minutes, and I think they will. But, you do have, I think the biggest reason why you're not seeing from us right now, these guys up in the low to mid 40s is just because we're not really sure how that power forward and center backup rotation works. But I think for now, this is kind of what we're looking at and what makes sense for sort of a short 9-man rotation that's effectively really an 8 with Javonte spelling Patrick for an extra stint there.
Yeah, 100%. This is our idealized version. Obviously, Donovan will have to adjust in game, and to your point, Will, if DeMar's playing 42 minutes, or we need DeMar to play 42 minutes, you can't rely on Javonte. You can't put in Coby or Io for as long as maybe what we've budgeted for here. Then maybe DeMar, instead of getting 3 stints, he plays 2 stints in the second half, for example. So that changes things, I guess. There's adjustments to be made, but as a baseline, assuming the Bulls are winning games and everything's going as perfectly as possible, then this is how we would like to see the rotation shake out. But obviously, based on how the variables change, then obviously the rotation should as well.
Yeah, I think we're in a good spot here with the rotations. Billy, if you need any help, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll say this. We did this before, sort of in preparation for this, and we'll have a great story coming out tomorrow on Tuesday at lchgo.com explaining some of our thought process. But this is tough. I mean, this is hard work, and trying to make sure that you get all the duos that make sense out here in terms of net rating and your 5-man lineups, and making sure that you have experience and defense and offense on the court at all times. It's definitely a hard job, but it was a fun project. So I hope you guys liked it. I think we're going to try to get out of here in under 20 minutes. And yeah, I mean, I had fun, Mark. I hope you did too. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at MKHoops, at Wim Gottlieb. You can follow our CHGO Bulls account at CHGO_Bulls. Again, we're brought to you by PointsBet. Sign up using promo code CHGO, and we're out.